Fantastic. Excellent. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gareth and Helen from the Senedd. Guys, it's over to you.
Well, mercifully, we're going to be sharing a slide deck because we've managed to pick the most uninspiring backdrop in our, just the most generic dining room office we could find to do this in a quiet space. So Helen's going to share some slides. So I've been reminded recently of the Ronald Reagan anniversary of his famous quote that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and we're here to help." Mercifully, we're not from the government, so we'll start with that, but we are here to help as best we can. So to kick us off, Helen's going to talk us through what Senedd's research does. We'll look at some examples then, including the way we're using maps to illustrate sort of hotspots for where people are signing petitions, how we turn data from ModGov into infographics, and some of the other infographic outputs we've done as a kind of experimental way of not doing lengthy reports. And then at the end, we'll come back with some questions and give you a chance to ask us what you'd like to hear.
That's lovely. Thanks, Gareth. Right, I am going to move on to the next slide then. So it's worth me explaining that within the Senedd, I work in the Senedd Research Department, whereas Gareth is based in Committee Services. So when I try and explain my role within Senedd Research, the easiest way I think to describe it is it's very akin to what people do in the House of Commons Library. We're there to ensure that all 60 members and their staff have access to expert and impartial research and information and meet their needs. So the members of the Senedd mainly have 2 roles, and the first one is representing their constituents. So we help them in terms of providing constituency information, any stats and data they need. And then their second role is they work on committees and plenary, and so it's Senedd Research job to help them provide either longer or shorter briefings. And members are very busy people and are very time short, so a lot of the work that we need to do needs to be really short and sharp and really clear, picking out key highlights of stats to answer their deadlines. So if I move on to how we're structured, we're about 30 researchers plus a physical library based in T Howell, and we cover 4 main policy areas. There's health, education, environment and economy, and a financial scrutiny unit which covers finance and stats information, which is where I'm personally based. And we've also got a European and constitutional affairs team and policy leads for each of these main policy areas like housing and transport. And members also employ their own political staff as well, but the main selling point of what we do is that we are an impartial service. So our work has to be politically impartial. It's factually based, but also analytical. And most of our work is reactive in terms of responding to inquiries from members and providing briefings for policy inquiries, for committees, scrutinising legislation, and also providing support for private members' bills. But an area we're moving into more is providing more proactive work. So we produce a lot of research articles and papers, which I will show you in a bit, some of the more of the interesting stuff that we've done on our website. So in terms of our main audiences, members are our main audience and their support staff, but we also provide information for parliamentary staff, other stakeholders, academics and the general public. So we've got quite a range of audiences, but members are our main audience. So members mainly use us, as I say, because we are impartial, we are experts in policy areas, and we can find and locate information quickly, whether it's in the library or online. We've got special contacts with other colleagues in other legislatures, House of Commons, Scottish Parliament, Northern Ireland Assembly and so on. So we share our research through that way. And we've also got a special way to access government information and stats through a protocol. So if I move on, so I'm just going to run through some of our different outputs, which include written briefings and shorter research articles, which we publish on our website. And we try to make our content as interactive and engaging as possible, while also taking into account accessibility considerations and making sure all our outputs are bilingual. So we just want our outputs to be clear, easy to understand, so members can pick them up and clearly pick out the key points. And also we want our outputs to be clearly recognised as Senedd research. So we've got quite clear branding, which you'll see as we go through the slides with the colours and the fonts and so on. So if I exit this presentation for a sec and show you some examples. So if the first one I'm going to show you, we've called the clause generator, which isn't a very exciting title, but we get asked a lot to do work on legislation, and legislation can be really complex and difficult to understand. So one we've done recently is on the Agricultural Wales Bill, which was, the actual bill itself was 48 pages long, and the explanatory memorandum was 476 pages. So it's a lot of pages to wade through and try and pick out the key points as to what the Agricultural Wales Bill is trying to achieve, what it's trying to do. So working with the researchers, we policy researchers in the environment team, they distill all that information into a spreadsheet format, pulling out all the key points and all the clauses within the bill. And then it's been categorized by colours. So you can see that on the left-hand side, we've got sustainable land management, agricultural tenancies, and carcass classification. That sounds interesting. So let's click on that one, and then that will select the clauses that are relevant to that classification and pull them out. So section 33 is about Welsh Minister's powers to identify certain carcasses by slaughterhouses. So yeah, so it's just a really neat way of just quickly finding out which provisions of the bill cover those. So if you want to look at what the bill's doing in those areas, you can quickly find out there. And the colour coding just makes it really easy to see. And this has been really popular. So we're rolling this out to loads of other pieces of legislation to do exactly the same thing. And also on this page, we have signposts to other parts of our bill summary and other interesting facts that the members and their staff might like to have a look at. So that one's the clause generator. And then the next one I was going to show you is our interactive budget diagram. So the Welsh Government set out each year their budgetary information. So they have their draft budget, supplementary budget and final budgets. And it's just basically their spending plans, how they're going to spend their money and what they're going to spend it on in the financial year. And it's normally released in PDF formats, in lots of tables. I think there are spreadsheets now, but it's not very accessible information. It's hard to try and distill what are the large areas the Welsh Government are spending their money on. So we thought, right, let's try and visually explain how the information can be used in a better way. So the interactive budget diagram shows all the main expenditure groups or the portfolio areas as circles, and the size of the circle represents the amount of money, and then it's got the different colours as well, so you can distinguish clearly which portfolio areas they are. And so if we click on health and social services, which is the largest one, if you've got the hover over, which says there that it's 10 billion, and then you can drill down then into each of these portfolio areas to the lowest level, which is called budget expenditure line, or BELS. So that's what the committees will be looking at to see where there's changes. So if we then expand on this box here, you can see it will say the budget information for the final budgets and how that compares to the draft budget in terms of millions of pounds. And then it's also got the change here. So it's a really interactive and clear way of seeing what's changed with the budget. And the Welsh Youth Parliament have used this a lot as well when they've been trying to look at the budget and trying to explain areas where the money's gone. Do you agree these should be the priority areas? So there's the actual monetary value, but then there's also the percentage change here as well. So if we click on this toggle, that then changes to show the blue is positive change and the red is negative change there, just to highlight what's been going on. So you can just drill down and find where things have changed. And the other element that's quite useful with this one is it's got the download the data buttons, so we try and make sure that where possible, people can download the data and then reuse it in ways that they may find more accessible or more useful. So that's the interactive budget tool. Then the next one I was going to show you was our income tax tool. So in 2019, we became responsible, or income tax rate, Welsh rates of income tax were devolved. So for every, this is quite a good graphic here with the pound coins, for every 10p, first 10p in the Welsh rates of income tax goes to the Welsh government, and then as the bands go higher, so you've got basic, higher, additional, the additional bit goes to the UK government. So the fiscal analysis unit within Cardiff University come up with some modelling. So we worked with them to produce this income tax tool where you can put in your income. So let's say I've got an amazing new job, Gareth.
Wow, that is amazing.
There we go. And then that will tell you how much of your income is going to the UK government and the Welsh government. And then you can play around with the tax bands as well. So this has been used quite recently as well. Just do some modelling and see if you increase the basic rate of tax, increase the higher rate of tax, and then you can see with the proportion and how much will be going to Welsh government and UK government. And there's also a behavioural response element here, which is explained in the notes, just explaining that as tax rates, the bands change, people may start to use more tax planning, tax avoidance, evasion, and even migrational effects there. So it's just been a really useful tool for planning that one and answering inquiries. And then the next one I was going to chat through was one which links to Gareth's work, is that from a Senedd research point of view, with when petitions come in, we're often asked to write a briefing, and the way our website was structured was all the briefings were under loads of different pages. So if we're trying to find all the briefings that have been done on agriculture or economy, we were having to search through the website to try and find them. So my colleague came up with this brilliant way of just classifying them according to the categories we use internally, just so we could just put them all on one page, and then they're all grouped together. So if we want to find out something about housing, they're all one page. So it's a lot of the work we do is just repurposing data that we've already got in-house and just trying to find a better way of displaying it that's of use to staff and members. And also the feature here of being able to filter by year is really useful, or just show all of them. So yeah, that was just quite a neat trick to bring all that work together. And then the other element that's always really popular with members is geographical maps. So the work we do tends to be at Senedd constituency level, which, without getting into too much complicated background information, Senedd constituencies are slightly different to parliamentary constituencies, very similar but slightly different. So trying to find data that actually matches to those areas exactly is quite difficult. So when we do get data, which was before the last elections in 2021, we try and use that to produce just mini area profiles. It's a really simple way of just showing the key data for that area. So how many people live there, their ages, percentage of Welsh speakers. Now we've got the census data coming out, and that's going to be produced at Senedd constituency level in June. We can update these and have hopefully a more complex dashboard where we can drill down into Senedd constituencies and also Senedd regions. So as well as having members who represent constituencies, we've got members who represent regions, which is another interesting angle we have to cover as well. So yeah, that's some of the geographical maps that we do. And then I'll come on to talk about some of the work we do with academics and our academic fellowships later. But the next, I'll go back to the presentation now. Right, so yeah, just so you've probably seen as I've been going through the slides that some of the things we do to try and make our work clear and accessible. So the branding, we've got very strict branding guidelines. So Senedd research, you can probably tell, is green. Emerald green is our theme that runs through. We've got certain icons we use, and our fonts. just to make sure that all our outputs are recognised as Senedd research and just really clear. All the colours have been through accessibility, so colour blindness and the fonts, just to make sure they're really clear to use. If we've used data and we are able to put it down as a download in an Excel format or another format, we always try to do that. And when we've got graphics, we always make sure they've got alt text behind as well, so people with screen readers can get exactly the same message as is being conveyed in the graphic. So, and also the bilingual aspects are all our outputs, whether it's interactive, static, or hard copies in the library, everything is bilingual. So I will let Gareth move on to talk about some of the exciting petitions work.
And just to pick up on that last point, the branding extends not just from physical outputs that come out of the library or from the research service, but also to the website, where there's a sub-site dedicated to the work that Senedd Research does, so that that's accessible to as many people as we can put it in front of. So I just wanted to talk about a project we've done over the last year. Senedd petitions are categorized by postcode. So when you sign one, you have to give your postcode to demonstrate where you live. We've always had that data available as JSON data, and if people asked, we could always tell them how many people had signed a petition where. But what we've been able to do now is turn that into maps, heat maps that show you exactly where something's happening. So if you can see the map on the screen, this is from a petition in support of greyhound racing in Wales. It's a response to another petition which was calling for a ban on greyhound racing in Wales, which received over 35,000 signatures earlier in the year. But I've shown this map because I think it gives you a great illustration of the power of these maps, because I think it wouldn't take many of you very long to guess where the only greyhound track in Wales is from looking at this map. You know, the dark pink Caerphilly-sized blob is home to the only track in Wales, in Ystrad Mynach. And you can see that the surrounding area, clearly those are the people that go greyhound racing and have taken an interest in it. A number of challenges involved in developing this for Wales. So we were inspired by the version on the UK Parliament's website, but they did a pretty basic version that basically done by an intern as a kind of project when they were working for the development company we used to power the petitions sites. The issue we had was that it had to be bilingual. As Helen's earlier mentioned, we have two different kinds of constituencies, so we need to be able to see both of those boundaries. And you know, we were really keen that this sort of data then be integrated into the website we have and also shareable on social platforms, because the way that petitions get the big numbers is by the petitioners sharing them. Facebook in particular drives so much of our traffic at the moment. So if we can, if Helen can just enable me to just see that then on the website. So just to work through some of the different tools. So available fully bilingually in both languages. I'll switch back. Go. So this is the constituency view. We can toggle to the regional view. Again, no surprises where the bulk of the signatures are coming from. And because we allow people to sign from outside Wales, because policing the border, frankly, would be a nightmare, you can see where people are signing the signatures from. So if you click or hover over England, it'll show you that 38% of the signatures are actually come from postcode addresses in England. If you dig into the JSON code behind it, you'll see that more people in Ireland have signed this petition than in Mid and West Wales. Again, Ireland, big home for breeders. And in addition to the map, you can see percentage of signatures or by percentage of constituents. I mean, it's very little difference as you toggle between the two. But sometimes, depending on the numbers, that can be significant. This data was already here. Sorry, can we go back to the... So the JSON data was baked into the site. And the text is pretty small, but you can see if you zoom in there, I can tell you the number of people from the Isle of Man, from Gibraltar, from New Zealand, from Pembrokeshire, from you name it. We can break it down into where that's from, because we asked for people's postcodes. One of the issues we're going to have is Senedd reform. It's likely that we'll have new boundaries for new constituencies in the 7th Senedd. But of course, because this is powered by postcodes, as long as we know where those boundaries are, we'll still be able to place those postcodes within those boundaries. We just wouldn't need to have the two different kinds of seats to toggle between. And the big thing is this data has always been available. It's there's a button on the website that says show the JSON data. It's not widely used. It's not widely understood. By making these maps visible and clear, I think we're doing a service to put this data out there, make it available. And again, if people wanted to play with it in other ways, that would be possible too. So I just wanted to look through a couple of other examples of ways in which we collect data and then try and make that more accessible. So like many in local government, we use ModGov as our business papers tool. So agendas and papers for committees will go out on the ModGov app. And then at the end of the term, at the end of a session, we're able to pull together all the data from the papers that we have. So 2 examples here, one in each language, of different committees summarising their work over the last 5-year term. Number of reports, number of events, number of debates, number of bills they've considered. But it just gives us a way of quantifying and demonstrating the work that committees have done, and bringing all that together in a way that hopefully people find a bit more readable and a bit more accessible. And then the other thing we try to do is just experiment with different ways of presenting some of the information and data we have. So this is a really good example, again, from the last Senedd, access to banking. And Helen's going to talk a bit more about some of the funky things we did with this, but we had lots of statistics. We had lots of data about how far people live from their nearest bank, how difficult it is for them to access it, the distances they have to travel and what that means for them. So working with the graphics team, we were able to put together a kind of at-a-glance one-pager that shows the key bits of information really from an inquiry. This was probably a 60-page report that included all of the references and all the footnotes, but we've tried to find a way of just breaking that down a little bit and show it to people in a way that they can engage with more quickly and more easily. So back to you, Helen.
Right. All right, if I just go back to the website. So yeah, as Gareth mentioned, with the banking, access to banking services, we within Senedd Research, because there's only 30 of us, and to try and be experts in all areas is not impossible. So when we need additional expert help, we've got an arrangement with a knowledge exchange program, which is run by one of my colleagues, which is great for tapping into additional expert advice from academics, and they can approach us or we approach them and say, are you interested in doing some work? So with the access to banking services, there was a committee inquiry ongoing, and we were approached by some academics who were doing some work on where banks were located and where they were starting to decline. So there was various different geographical methods used here. So the first 3 maps here just showing the distance to the nearest branch it's probably quite small on your screen, sorry, but in 2008 and then 2018, the blue maps are the tiny yellow dots are the actual locations of the banks, and then the distance needed to travel. So you can just see in that 10-year time period, the number of banks that have closed, and that the distance has increased from 2.8 kilometres to 3.8 kilometres in 2018. And the rural areas have really been hit by the branch closures. And then the map with the red showing those areas where the actual distance has changed the most. So they used the distance travelled first, and then the second method was the container method, which was basically saying if your constituencies were actually, you couldn't travel outside of your constituency, there was like a hard brick wall all the way around, and looking at that, which isn't very practical in terms of trying to analyse distance. So the distance travelled is more useful. And then this was their advanced method of looking at how far people would have to travel, called the container method, which is looking at a really granular level. So it's not just looking at a constituency level, you're really drilling down into small areas called lower tier super output areas, with the sort of dark black and red being the areas which have lost the most banks over that time period. So yeah, it was just an interesting piece of work to work on, and just calling on experts to help us with our work. And as Gareth mentioned, all the research articles are all on the website, so if anybody's interested, just having a browse through and just seeing there's a huge amount of work that goes on there, and help for constituency and guides and maps and so on. So if I just go back to the presentation, I think we have reached the end.
There was just one final point that I wanted to say, perhaps. And that's that within the Senedd, we've created a group of people from across multiple departments who have an interest in data to come together and share what they're doing, facilitate the sharing of good practice, but also to generate ideas for ways we can do this better. And the reason we're here is because we invited Suzanne to one of our meetings and felt honour bound to come to one of hers, I suppose, to do that. But I suppose for that group, we're bringing together people with interest, but also hopefully driving training needs, because I think we all see this as a thing that's only going to become more important as we move forward. So yeah, that's us. More or less the time, Suzanne.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. There are no questions currently in the chat box, so if anybody on the call does have questions, please add them to the chat. But I obviously, as always, have a couple of questions, if that's okay. So I guess one of a generic question in some ways, and I think actually one of your slides, since I wrote this question down, has been answered. But what I was going to ask is, do you use and publish data that you've collected yourself, or are you more largely consumers of other data and you're just making that accessible to your members?
I think it depends. So the petitions data is our data. So that's a good example of us using our own stuff. And similarly, anything relating to publications on the website or would belong to us. Because Helen's here from the research service, it probably sounds like you use more external data.
Yeah, within Senedd Research, most of our work is looking at data that's already been published and is available in the public domain, and just repurposing it in a way that pulls out the key messages. But yeah, in terms of actual data Senedd produces, I'd say petitions and probably the record of proceedings, which is like the written record of plenary and committee. That's the most amount of data which we produce.
And comms do some interesting stuff, tracking their social media activity and their news engagement. Again, that would be their own data, although largely sourced through an external contract to monitoring contract.
Thank you. And then I do have a question on the petitions data. Firstly, I presume that the type of dissemination you showed there, the maps, is that available and accessible to anyone via your website?
Yeah. So if you click on the petitions website, petitions.senedd.wales, click on any petition, and then within you'll find the text of the petition and do you want to sign it, but it'll also say show on map, and you can see again by constituency, by language, whichever way you want, where it's hot. One of the things we find is that if there was one we had a while back that was safe hospitals in Pembrokeshire or whatever, you just see Pembrokeshire glowing bright pink and complete disinterest in the northeast of Wales naturally. But for things like that, it just brings it home to members that this is a really strong local issue when you can show them, look, this part of Wales is nearly red, this part of Wales is white. So yeah, super useful to me as a clerk.
Yeah, and that kind of almost follows with the other question I had around them, is how might you as a Senedd, use the information to do with the petitions? Is there something you specifically do with the kind of mapping, and how do you use that information internally? Or is it not for internal consumption?
No, so So there are two ways, I think. One is that where there's a strong local interest and there is a hotspot, and we can tell members that that's the case. And the other one is this issue around the border issue. So we decided a long time ago not to try and police the border and say, oh, you know, you can't sign it if you live in England or Scotland, because there are lots of people who live in Wales but work across the border, or work in Wales and live across the border. You know, there are all sorts of anomaly issues that we wouldn't want to get into. So we allow everybody to sign it. But one of the things that members said at the beginning is, how do we know these are people from Wales? How do we know that these are the people we care about, you know, our constituents? So one of the things we use that data for is to show members the extent of feeling in Wales. Certainly, you know, the animal welfare stuff, there are generally UK-based charities who get behind these campaigns, and we get signatures from all over the world. You know, the greyhound racing is a great example. Literally every country that we have have information on, there's somebody has signed it. But yeah, to be able to show that to members, again, in a way that's easier than a table of JSON data that you know is just, yeah, fine to me.
Excellent, thank you very much.
I think our colleague Dav's been in the chat and just showing some of the examples in there.
Absolutely. And then the clause generator you showed at the very beginning, is that for all bills that have been published?
It's not for all bills that have been published. I think we started work on that probably about 6 months ago. So off the top of my head, colleagues could correct me, it's probably about 4 or 5 that we've done. But from going forwards, as my colleague's just brilliant at just setting up like a template. So now the researchers have got a spreadsheet to fill in all the data that's needed, and then he's great at doing coding in Python, so that then turns it into script for the website. So going forward, we're going to try, that's the aim, to do all bills going forward. But yeah, it was just like a new tool, and I'm sure there's other applications for that as well. They haven't come to me yet, but I'm thinking just ways of showing textual data in a different way. Was normally when you say data, people just automatically think numbers, but I think with text as well, just coding stuff up, theming it, just making it easier to understand. And that's the other thing that's probably worthwhile saying. If anybody on the call is interested in any of the examples specifically, by all means get in contact. And if it's more of the techie elements, then we can put you in contact with colleagues who'd be happy to chat about how we've gone about doing it, any issues we found, and things like that. So yeah, it's sort of a whistle-stop tour of some of the bits of work we've been working on. But yeah, we're constantly trying to innovate and just make things easier to use for members and the general public, just so people are getting full value from our work.
Excellent, thank you very much. So there are no other questions. So I think I've gone quite lightly, that's excellent. So if there are no other questions, I guess it just remains for me to thank you very much, both of you, for coming along and talking to us and our colleagues today. And thank you to everybody who has joined us. We can put Helen and Gareth's contact details, I'm assuming you don't mind, into the chat, and we'll put those in, and the chat bar will remain live after this session, so that if anybody does want to get in contact with you then about anything they've heard, then they can.
And Suzanne, we've shared the slide deck with you, so if anybody wants that, they can get that from you.
Send that out, absolutely.
And it's all recorded as well.
And you've got it bilingually, so we'll send out bilingually, which is perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording.